My name is Debbie Wilson. My husband and I are farmers in Steuben County. We have 3 children and 8 grandchildren. They've all grown now, have their own homes. Our 2 boys married Christian girls and have beautiful families that we totally enjoy. Our daughter Elizabeth graduated from Houghton College and then went to Buffalo area. She worked for the Buffalo Bills for about 1.5 years. But because of their losing streak, she was only part-time, and so she found a better job at a notable corporation where she did graphic design for them. So she found herself a cute little house, and her and I together redid it. She loved it. She loved the neighborhood. She was within distance of being able to hear the Niagara Falls and hearing the fireworks at night that went over it. She had dated quite a few boys through the years, but hadn't found Mr. Right. She was 27 years old and had just gotten over a very hurtful relationship when she met Peter. Peter was a next-door neighbor. The apartment had been empty because he was in Iraq serving our country. So she waited patiently for him to come home to meet. And so they met each other by his eave trough falling in her yard. And they went out and they met. And he just flowered her with compliments. And literally flowered her with flowers. Candlelit dinners, just won her heart over. And like I mentioned before, she hadn't met Mr. Right, but most of her girlfriends had. They were married and having babies. So she thought for sure she'd found Mr. Right. They dated for a couple years, and slowly he started to become controlling. He wanted to know where she was, where she'd been, who she'd been with. Very demanding of her time and energy. And each year we'd gone to Women of Faith together, along with a lot of other things that we did together. But in 2011, she rededicated her life to Christ. At that point, she realized he's not Mr. Right because he doesn't have Christ first in his life. He had gone to Christian school and professed to be a Christian, but because of his actions and the way he treated her, especially when he'd get upset, he would just call her all kinds of names, just tear her to pieces. Leave her crying and not even sure she was in her right mind. He'd convince her that she was like going crazy. So she called me and said, could you come up because I'm going to break up with Peter and I don't know how he'll react. So I jumped right in the car, went right up. By the time I got there, she'd already broken up with him and he was just perfectly fine. He was a gentleman. He apologized. He had treated her wrong and he knew it, and he wanted to be the man of God that she deserved. So at that point, he'd show up at her house, go to church with her, still would be like almost stalking her, asking her out to dinner. Sometimes she would say, no, I've got other plans. Other times she'd give in and say yes because she'd feel like, well, if he's going to become the man of God that he wants to become, then I should be his friend. Well, kept getting more and more out of control. Pretty soon things were missing in her house or moved. And she couldn't figure out how that was happening. So she got the locks changed on her house. After that, he was even more demanding. He'd be on her doorstep, knocking on the door, wanting to know where she'd been, who she'd been with. They had a dog together. He'd be asking questions about the dog. Or he'd call her at work and say, my mom, who lives just across the street from her, just saw your dog running down the road, so she'd rush home, and then he'd be there waiting for her. Any way he could control her, he did. So at that point, she'd called the police, and they did nothing. He was taking criminal justice courses and was going to be hired by them, so he knew them all personally. And he'd say to her, after he'd scream and holler and yell and call her names, and she'd say, I'm going to get a restraining order, he'd say, if you even call the police before you get out your driveway, they will arrest you for something, because I know every one of them personally. So she had called the police a few times, like when she'd see him out back going through her garbage, when she thought the house had been broken into, or not really broken into, but somehow he'd gotten into it, but they did nothing. She was getting prank phone calls on her phone. The person would either hang up, or they'd say they were from the pistol permit people, and that she had said that she would be a reference for him for his pistol permit. She would tell them, I'm not with him anymore. I do not want to be his reference. And they continue to call. So finally she called the pistol permit people. And she said to them, do you do interviews over the phone? They said, no, we don't ever. They told her to take her phone to the local sheriff, not the local police, and have it downloaded, which she did. They downloaded all the text messages, all the phone calls, and they start tracing them. This is like the third week in February. She had put her house on the market. We had gone to Texas, and she'd had a job interview. She, at that time, we had a really good time. While we were there, the job seemed perfect. I was a little hesitant because I hated to see her move so far away, because I was afraid he'd follow, plus she had nobody down there that she knew. Well, I was real sick at the time. I'd been going through all kinds of tests. The doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with me, and I hadn't told her about this because she had enough stress in her life. But she must have noticed on our trip, because she told her Bible study friends that her mom was too sick to leave her and that she wouldn't be going to Texas, at least not right now. She was going to put her house on the market, move to the other side of Buffalo to get away from Peter, be closer to home, be closer to her church. So at night online, we'd look for houses. She'd call me with a house number, and I'd look it up, or I'd find a number and call her or text her and say, look at this one. We had a lot of fun doing that. That week, Friday night, she went to a girlfriend's house, and she saw that Peter was following her. So she took back ways and lost him, pulled into the girl's garage, shut the door so he wouldn't find her. That night, they peacocked her hair. They had a really good night. The next day, Saturday morning, she did things around the house to get it ready for her open house the following Sunday, because she had put it on the market. He was at her door just screaming and hollering, how can you put your house on the market? How can you put a lockbox on your house? People are going to be breaking in. You won't be safe, and on and on. Again, making her feel like maybe she was a little bit crazy and putting her in tears. Sunday she went to church, and then after church went out to lunch with her Bible study friends, and then they went to open houses, looking at houses in the area that she was interested in. I called her that day, and she told me she'd call me back at night and see how it went. I didn't hear from her that night. Monday, I was going to call her during lunch at work, but I had to work through lunch. When I got home, I gave her a phone call. No answer. Thought that was kind of funny, because usually on our way home from work, she either calls me or I'd call her, and we'd talk all the way home because we both have Bluetooth. Called her again about 7. She didn't answer. I went to bed at 10, thinking that's funny she didn't call me back, but I know her Mondays are crazy too. At 11:11, I got a phone call. I was sound asleep. They identified themselves as the Niagara Falls police, and it told me that my daughter had been fatally wounded. I'm like, fatally? I think that means dead. I said, you don't tell someone, you don't tell a mother over the phone that her daughter is dead. I don't believe you. I think this is the prank caller. I threw the phone on the bed, went to my computer. In the meantime, my husband woke up. He goes, what is going on? So I told him, so he called back the number that had called me. They answered it as the Niagara Falls Police Department. He said, we don't believe you. Nobody identifies somebody this way, notifies somebody this way. If this is true, had the local police come tell us. Meantime, I'm on the computer. I'm trying to call her on the phone. No answer. I'm on the computer on Facebook, Facebooking every one of her friends, seeing if they knew what was going on. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And then there was a knock on the door. The police came in, and they told us that it had been an apparent murder-suicide. That he had been on her back doorstep that night when she went home, and that he had slit her throat and then stabbed her repeatedly. And then went across the road to his mother's house, got a shotgun, came back over, sat down beside her, and took his own life. I have a hard time still believing this. Even as I'm telling you this story, I feel like I'm telling somebody else's story. A month later, I found out I had breast cancer. And so I had a mastectomy, chemotherapy, and just lay in bed and prayed and cried. And that was my healing time. Never would you think breast cancer would be a good thing, but at that point in my life it was a good thing, because I'm the local postmaster, and when I went to work, everybody would engulf me with prayer and hugs, and you only can take so much of that. You have to be by yourself sometimes. So during that time, I prayed, my husband prayed, and we got through those months. After I was well enough from my cancer, I started a Bible study. We used the material that Elizabeth had been doing with her Bible study. They mailed it to us and dedicated it to Elizabeth. As we grew over the next 2 years, our Bible study thought, you know what, we should be doing some type of ministry. Well, I had, in the meantime, anytime I had clothes, and I donated all Elizabeth's clothes to the women's shelter. But it took me that long to really admit that this was domestic violence, because up to this point, he had never touched her. Mm. He would belittle her, and he would argue and yell at her, but never physically. But I realized that it only takes once, and that once was definitely domestic violence. So we decided to adopt the women's shelter in our local area to minister to them in some way. So I went out and asked them if they ever had inspirational speakers come. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, just someone that would come in and maybe talk to the girls spiritually and emotionally and let them know that they are loved. And she said, no. And I said, well, we would like to do that. And they were just ecstatic. They were like, when can we do it? Yes. And so we started doing it about once a month. I'd go in, I'd tell Elizabeth's story. We would do a craft with them so that their hands were busy. At this point, they aren't even making eye contact with you. Mm. But by the time I finish my story, they are opened up and telling us things that they don't even tell their counselors. Mm. We went back to our Bible study and we said, okay, we're doing this time together with these girls, but then we're leaving them. We're leaving them with a Bible, we're leaving them with a plan of salvation, but we're never seeing them again. What are we going to do with this ministry? What more can we do? And then the idea of doing housewarmings came up. These girls, after they've been at the shelter for a while, DSS or child support or whatever they're working through makes them get their own apartment because it's cheaper for DSS to do that. It's cheaper for our county to do that. So they put them in an apartment. Here are these girls. They've left their family. They've left their friends. They've left most of their belongings to escape from their abusers. So we do a housewarming party. The shelter gives them anything they have that's been donated to them. So a girl might get, say, a kitchen table, 2 plates, table settings. They make sure they'd have the absolute necessities if they could. Maybe a mattress on the floor. And that's it. So we get a list from the girls. Okay, what do you girls still need? And they send us a text with, well, we would like some blankets. We really don't need a lot. Maybe a couch. You know, they're not demanding at all. So we, through donations from our local churches and from our local friends, give them everything they need. Sometimes we have to buy a few things. Most of the housewarmings we end up having to buy new towels and maybe a throw rug or 2, maybe lampshades because we have the lamps. But basically, things come in like miracles. We have one situation where one of the girls called and said, this girl really needs a microwave. The oven doesn't work in her apartment. Do we have any microwaves? I said, not right now, but we'll look into it. I hung up the phone. My phone rings. We have a microwave. Could you use that? We just have this happen over and over. Just little miracles like that, reinforcing that this is God's will for our life and for our ministry and for our Bible study and for these girls. By the time we have the housewarming parties, these girls that would not make eye contact with us are hugging us and praying with us. Each time we have a housewarming party, I make up individual baskets for the girls with makeup, lipstick, maybe bubble bath in their favorite colors. We ask them their favorite colors. We try to do their bedrooms in their favorite colors to make their stark, cold, lonely apartments into a home. After our daughter passed away, my second son, went up to her house and got a local church to get together and pack up all her belongings and bring them home. When we got her computer, I opened it up, and inside we found this little note that she had written that weekend. And it says, there is so much focus today on acceptance and being part of a couple. One important and simple fact should be recognized by all women of God everywhere. If you have accepted Christ into your heart, then you have the perfect man, and he loves you. John 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. And through this, people are being saved. She didn't know she was laying down her life for her friends. But the girl that was on the phone with her, her best friend was on the phone with her when this happened. About a week later, she gave her life to Christ. Some of her nephew gave his life to Christ. Classmates gave their life to Christ. And now through this ministry, we see the girls giving their life to Christ and growing spiritually.
So where can we get more information about serving and partnering with your ministry?
Okay, we have a Facebook page. It's called Elizabeth Rose Ministry. You can also call me at 607-377-4011.
Vista 2.
We are associated with the Buena Vista Wesleyan Church, so if you'd like to give a cash donation, you would send it to Buena Vista Wesleyan Church, 6034 County Road 69, Canisteo, New York, 14823. On the memo, write Elizabeth Rose Ministry.